Joseph, here he comes down in Egypt. What does he want? Everybody's coming into the African Nile Valley. Everybody's coming to the place that we don't want to be today. I'm going to Africa. Why are you going to Africa? But every time you go to France or England, have a great trip. Have a nice trip. But anytime you go into Africa, people ask and even whisper as though the white folks are on the sideline listening. But when we go into the accounts of Joseph, Joseph was sold into slavery by his own brothers to the Ishmaelites, according to the Bible, for 20 pieces of silver. Now, 200 years after Abraham, Joseph comes into the land of Kemet. Who was on the throne then? Every librarian in the United States will tell you this. During that time of Joseph, the Hyksos were on the throne who were enslaving our own Kemetic Africans of the African Nile Valley. We were enslaved ourselves by the Hyksos. So Joseph came into a land of a people who didn't belong there themselves. And if the biblical account says that the Pharaoh gave Joseph his daughter, we also know that couldn't have had nothing to do with African people, because we had a matrilineal system. We saw that our daughters were goddesses. We would have never given our daughter up to a foreigner. But the Hyksos gave away African Kemetic daughters because that was their custom. But it was not the custom of African people. Clearly tells us that the Hyksos were on the throne at that time who had us enslaved at that time. Let's go look at some of the other customs of Joseph. Often quoted as a striking Egyptian parallel to the biblical story of Potiphar's wife's attempted seduction is the tale of the two brothers from the 19th dynasty Abini Papyrus. It says right here in the Abini Papyrus, let's look at the comparison between our ancestors' papyrus and Joseph, and so see how this story was plagiarized from our African ancestors. Then she, the older brother's wife, talked with him, saying, "There is great strength in you. Now I see your energies every day." And she wanted to know him as one knows a man. Then she stood up and took hold of him and said to him, "Come, let's spend an hour sleeping together." Then the lad became like a leopard with great rage at the wicked suggestion which she had made to him. "See here, your husband is like a father to me. What is this great crime which you have said to me?" Let's look at Joseph now. Now Joseph was handsome and good looking, and a time came when his master's wife took notice of him and said, "Come, lie with me." But he refused and said to her, "Think of my master. He has entrusted me with all he has. How can I do anything so wicked?" Literally plagiarized from our African ancestors' Abini Papyrus. Let's go look at other stories. How about the story of Moses now? Moses opens up in the Bible where supposedly the Pharaoh's daughter takes him out of the basket, out of the bulrushes. Is that right? Now this is a white folks pictorial Bible that clearly show the Pharaoh's daughter has been black, clearly showing her being an African with African braids, not French braids. Huh? And then they clearly show Moses as being lily white. Now brothers, if your daughter come in the house with a lily white baby, and the baby just grows right up and you don't even notice this lily white baby running around, you're going to ask some questions where this baby came from. But where did this story come from, brothers and sisters? Because we are told that Moses, who was pulled from the bulrushes, was born in the area of Goshen, grew right up there in Egypt, and became a high priest. But let's see where the story came from. Let's see that right there in Kemet, our ancestors told a story long before Moses pulled from the bulrushes, where Isis had to hide in the papyrus swamps because Set was out to kill Horus. And she had to hide in the papyrus swamps. Look at her crown and her hair. They even took the same crown and the same hair, and just as it is on the pictorial white folks' Bibles. Showing you they copied this story directly from your ancestors. Let's put it into a scale of law. Let's go into this thing further, showing where they literally copied this from African people because Set was out to kill Horus because Set crucified his father Osiris, or Asaru as our ancestors called him. So Set was out to kill Horus because he feared he would grow up and avenge his father's death. the Nisu, in the form of the dua. He's in the form of the dua, and what is that dua or admiration for?
Praise.
Praise, but praise to what?
The stars.
What star is that?
I say.
The star is a set, so why is it being praised? What's happening here? When that star comes, what happens?
The new year.
Transformation.
Okay, let's bring it to you in Christianity. When the star in the east appears, what did that tell them?
A bird.
Peru.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Right. So that was copied from here, showing the dua giving birth to Sepulsipta. That's the star Sepulsipta that the Romans called Ceres and the Greeks called Solis. When that star appeared, that meant that at December the 25th, the sun was born. And that, who is a personification of the sun?
Haru.
Haru. So Haru is going to be born at this time because that star was perpendicular to the star system, the star Ra, that was a personification of Haru. So here we see the story that the evil brother who cut up a star, who is holding the scepter, it never touches the ground, 360 degrees of the living perpendicular. Here she's going to set his Netrahemp, is going to bring Asar back to life. But how is she going to bring him back to life? She's holding up in her hand a beautiful relief right here, the Netrahemp. That means the divine life. She's going to raise him up because from that Netrahemp, it represents her womb, her uterus. Out of that womb will be born the holy child Haru. Now, when we understand that, how we as an African people were cut up, and let's tie that to today, and spread all over the world, is that right? Yes, right. Taken from Africa, some of us were brought to America, some of us to South America, some of us to Europe and England and other places, is that right?
Right.
So here we see that a Set is the one who had to travel throughout the land, pulling together all the pieces of Asar's body to resurrect him to life. Now, we can take this story and tie it to our story because we have been cut up and spread around the world. And what is it going to take to reconstruct us? The African woman. Because it is her womb that'll bring what? Life. New life. By her having new life and reconstructing us, then we can be a people for eternity. So this is why we see the system in America will grab our youth and then have them desecrate sisters and call their names, knowing that that spirituality of the divinity and deification that we had for the African woman, once that is destroyed, then we are no more. I think we should have a tradition, even though you may not know her, that every time you pass an African woman, you should bow to her. That's right. Because that represents the resurrection of the race, so we have to take our ancestral stories and tie it to today. And tying it to today, we take the story of a Set who had to reconstruct the Asar's body, taking the Netrahemp, the symbol of divine life, raising him to the living perpendicular of 360 degrees, so he can live again. And he symbolizes what? Resurrection and salvation, because he is the ruler in the afterlife. And I think that these books in stone gives us a tradition that will help in our emancipation, our continual emancipation. And that's the mental part of our emancipation, brothers and sisters. So I think that this is what we have got to get back to. And these books in stone, as though our ancestors wrote, as though one day we would forget our story. But as long as these books are in stone are here, we can reconstruct our story and pull it together. And not look at it as something negative or something evil that the Western world, if it was supposed to be so evil and negative, then why would they come and copy the whole thing? Is that right? Yes. So you can take the picture of a Set holding up the Netrahemp and raising Asar up to the living perpendicular of 360 degrees of spiritual knowledge. Because without that, no lights, please, no lights. Because without that on, we would not be here. Is that right?
Right.
Some of you come from somewhere else? No. You came down that fallopian tube
Right. Yep.
Where were you at?
Inside that room.
You were inside that micro universe. Your mother. When we're into arts, all the various forms that we find ourselves in, and we still find ourselves in the deification of somebody else's culture or some other people. Like, for instance, martial arts. If you go in a dictionary, you'll find that martial means a Roman god of war. Who would want to identify with a Roman god of war? And especially when you look at the art defense system that all of you will have an equal chance to see in just a few minutes. Long before martial, a Roman god of war, and long before the Asian art defense system, the origin of all of that came right here in Kemet. It was called the Mantu. The Mantu art form was an African defense system, long before a Roman god of war called martial art. Here you see another art form, even using the sticks and the art form. The one would look at as some kind of a karate chop. And then you see a flip that's taking place right here. So here you see, right, what they call judo. Here you see a flip right here, and also another form of the art with the brothers are trying to defeat the other and bring him down. So here you see an African defense system, but I want to show you that this is an African origin that goes as far back as the Nubas. That came from the Nubas, brothers and sisters. It was an African defense system, meaning that in this African defense system, you see the same exact thing right here. Now look at this here form right here, and look at these brothers from Nuba. Look how far back this goes. This is the same type of African defense system that is going on right now with the Nubas that you see with these two brothers right here, to show it's an African art form all the way from the Nubas. The Nubas who live in the highlands of the Sudan. Now, also, just as you see these two brothers right here, mixing it up, one trying to flip the other down, and look at the Nuba brother that you see right here. Okay? So that's why we come back in all forms to show our story so we can document it, not just to have it from a European perspective, but have it from our African perspective, our African Kemetic perspective. We look up at this great African colossal, you can see the phenotype of who he is. So we come back here to the original northeast corner. After all, everybody's coming here. Abraham, he had to come where? He comes to Egypt. Even the story of Jesus, he's coming in Egypt. Everybody's coming here, but we going somewhere else. Maybe that's why we got problems. The Greeks are coming here. Wait till you get in Upper Egypt. They loved Kemet. They incorporated it to their Greek philosophy. Even though they gave credit to themselves, they didn't give it credit to the Grand Masters of Nile Valley. They call it the Pythagorean theorem. Right. So you had to go to school and you had to learn the Pythagorean theorem. So, and psychologically, as a child coming up, then you started to deify the Western world because all the sciences are in their name. Like the young brother came back here one year. Father is a nuclear physicist. Do you understand what I just said? His father is a nuclear physicist. His father told him, why are you coming to Egypt? You should be going to Greece. Even though he's a nuclear physicist, half of his brain is gone. Because his father was trained as a child and going through that process of white supremacy educational system in their names, that this civilization started with him. So he couldn't think that there was nothing here for his son to come back to. And that's why we come back here to activate an African ancestral genetic memory bank. Another good teacher of mine named Dr. Richard King opened that up in his book, The African Origin of Biological Psychiatry. The African origin of a genetic memory bank is still there, but it's lying dormant. So we're opening up an African ancestral genetic memory bank. Don't think the Emancipation Proclamation is what freed you. A piece of paper don't free you. Your mind's got to free you. So that's the whole objective and purpose of this journey. And that's why we call it Know Thyself. And that didn't start with Socrates. Socrates stole it from here, from the great forget that you're going to see on the temples, Sundus Wing. This activation of the pineal gland to bring out spiritual consciousness.
Put this in your own mental court of law. Let's see all the evidence. And once all the evidence is presented, we can see where European Western version of Christianity copied from this. Right. And judge it for yourself. You've heard their side of the story? Take time out and hear your ancestors' side of the story. We're saying
our African ancestors, brothers and sisters, saw the matrilineal system. Keep in mind that all the kings had to come through the line of the woman. Is that right? What man can say he didn't come from a woman? Please step forward so we can understand where you came from. So our ancestors had no problems understanding that divine principle of that sacred womb where we all came from. That was the basis and foundation of the goddess principle and the matrilineal system in Africa. And our ancestors saw, in order for the king to rule the throne, like you have Ursa Ma'at here, the goddess Shishat. Here you see her in the tree of divine wisdom, giving the fruit of divine knowledge and wisdom in order for him to rule the throne. It had nothing to do with no tree of good and evil. The patriarchs who came from the north, the Hyksos and others, who had a misogynistic nature, a hatred towards the woman, could not conceive of a woman nor a goddess giving a man anything. And that story was corrupted. The tree of divine wisdom and divine life was corrupted into the tree of what? Because here we have that they created in their biblical stories in the opening of the pages in Genesis that there was Adam and Eve, is that right? And they were not to eat of the tree of what? Knowledge of what? Good and evil. Now who was seduced by the serpent and ate from the tree? That's why, sisters, you got to watch and hear that sound. Psst. But anyway, here we see that she was seduced to eat the fruit, and then she seduced who? Adam. Now we are told that that's the reason for the world's sins of this first woman eating of the tree of good and evil, and that that's also not only the reason for the world's sins, but her monthly cycle is to remind her of that sin. This is what's taught in the church. The African story is the goddess Shishat giving the fruit of divine life from the tree of divine life and wisdom in order for the king to rule the throne. On this relief, brothers and sisters, you can see many concepts where they came in, as I said, like scavengers and picked different pieces. On this particular relief, you can see where the Western world through Judaism took a piece of a concept of the creation story from. You can see where the Greek philosophers took a concept of Greek philosophy from. And you can also see where Christianity took a concept, European Christianity took a concept from. So let's break it down. Again, carved in stone on the temple of Aset, right here on the island of Philae. It is here. It tells where the Western world,
literally came like scavengers and took various scenes to make up the Western world. And one of those scenes is we see that Hermes Trismegistus and Greek mythology, they literally took it from Tahuti. It is here that our ancestors had a study from the 42 books of Tahuti, representing science, law, and intelligence, who was represented as the ibis bird that you saw. We saw those little white birds that we saw come over here. So our ancestors looked at nature. We didn't worship the bird, but it was an attribute of science, attribute of intelligence. Tahuti writing down the deeds of our life on earth as we lived here. This is where the Western philosophical thought, Greeks took their concept of Hermes Trismegistus from Tahuti, now called thought too. So we see Judaism took God Khnum, fashioning man out of clay, and called him Jehovah. But notice the God Khnum fashioning man on the potter's wheel out of clay. This is where Judaism took a portion of this to make up their Genesis story with the Sanhedrins around 250 BC. From this relief right here of God fashioning man and woman on the potter's wheel. And they took other concepts of Atum from Heliopolis creation story, or the city of On, to make up their Adam as a man, when actually it was Atum the son. And we see European Christianity took from the goddess Isis and Horus and made up the European, again, let me express, the European version of Mary and Jesus. Copied directly from these reliefs right here. So you got Greek philosophy, where he took from Tahuti and called it Hermes Trismegistus. You got the Jehovah Genesis creation story and the Bible, where they took from Khnum, fashioning man on the potter's wheel out of clay, and they turned it into making man out of clay, Adam out of clay. And you also got Christianity right here showing Isis lactating or breastfeeding the holy child Horus, who was born of immaculate conception and virgin birth. Three concepts just from this one relief. You see? All carved in stone. As you can see the line, one dark, one light, showing where this temple was under the water. Nobody could come back and read this. And that's why over here, if you look against this wall right here, much of it, they try to chisel it all out. But our ancestors wrote endlessly as though one day we would forget our story. One day we would not know who we are. One day that the only thing that we put on our genetic memory bank would be an alien, a conqueror's story. In our mind, our story would not be told. To show you, sisters, that y'all sacred. You are goddesses. And that's the problem with the brother today. Because they took that concept out of his consciousness. That's why the rap groups around there calling her the bees and stuff. Huh? Okay, now look. Isis holding the Ankh of life. We know what the Ankh of life now is, a symbol of her uterus, right? So here, again, I'll show you, showing where the holy child is coming from her womb. See the loop? That's why she's holding it, because she wants the first immaculate conception and the first holy birth is going to come from her. So she's holding the Ankh for life. Can you see it? Not too much glare there, right? That's why the Europeans, when Justinian and the boys Theodosius, they came in, they tried to chisel it out. Couldn't deal with the real immaculate conception, but they weren't talking about one immaculate conception. Our ancestors were telling us on these reliefs that every woman could produce an immaculate conception, provided that she was on the spiritual level and the man was on the spiritual level. The both of them coming together produced immaculate virgin birth, which means a clean birth. But notice they chiseled out the Ankh, the top part of it, because that represents the womb. But the other part they kept there to represent the crucifix. You see? That symbol that they didn't take or didn't chisel out was a symbol of the cross. They didn't chisel that one out. So this is another picture of Constantine. Constantine's vision of the cross, which he is pointing to this symbol, Sec Vincius. In this symbol, we shall conquer. Through this symbol, we shall conquer. Supposedly, Constantine got the cross out on the battlefield. Another picture, but now that we know that Constantine came here, now we know where, in fact, Constantine got the cross from. Huh? Right off of your ancestor temples. Has nothing to do with, this is blowing here, has nothing to do with no crucifixion or human sacrifice. Europeans corrupted it. Now we have no understanding or meaning of what the cross means today. And chisel out the Ankh, which was a symbol for life. Now look
Our African ancestors, brothers and sisters, saw the matrilineal system. Keep in mind that all the kings had to come through the line of the woman. Is that right? That's right. What man can say he didn't come from a woman? Please step forward so we can understand where you came from. So our ancestors had no problems understanding that divine principle of that sacred womb where we all came from. That was the basis and foundation of the goddess principle and the matrilineal system in Africa. And our ancestors saw, in order for the king to rule the throne, like you have Ursa Ma'at here, the goddess Sheshat. Here you see her in the tree of divine wisdom, giving the fruit of divine knowledge and wisdom in order for him to rule the throne. It had nothing to do with no tree of good and evil. The patriarchs who came from the north, the Hyksos, who had a misogynistic nature, a hatred towards the woman, could not conceive of a woman nor a goddess giving a man anything. And that story was corrupted. The tree of divine wisdom and divine life was corrupted into the tree of what? Because here we have that they created in their biblical stories in the opening of the pages in Genesis that there was Adam and Eve, and they were not to eat of the tree of what? Knowledge of what? Good and evil. Now who was seduced by the serpent? What you see right there is the pyramid, is the boat of Khufu. That is his solar boat. This boat is 140 feet long, longer than Captain Cook's boat. When this boat was excavated in 1954 in a pit, over 1,200 pieces, the boat was dismantled. And they reconstructed, took 1,200 pieces to reconstruct this boat of Khufu. Now, what was the purpose of this boat? This boat was called the Nuank. What is the Nuank? What was the Nuank? The flooding of the Nile was called the Nuank. Now, when the Nile flooded, it was Khufu who realized that he could take his solar astral journey through the Nile to the celestial Nile. That was the Milky Way, to take him back to his father, Asar. So the Milky Way was looked at as the celestial Nile, like the earthly Nile. So it was the Nuank that took him back. That was the purpose of his boat. That later it was corrupted into Noah's Ark. Noah's Ark was taken from the Nuank. This is where it came from. Nowhere are you going to find no Noah's Ark. If you were back at the time of 4,000 years ago, or during the time of Khufu, and you asked him about Noah, boy, what's wrong with you? You know nothing about no Noah. You see my boat here? This is where the story came from. The position that you will see of all the Grand Masters, such as Meruka, is with his left leg forward. And many of the other kings, you always see the left leg forward. Why is the left leg always forward? The left leg is forward, first of all, because the heart is on the left side, and they must trample down evil. Evil is always present. Our ancestors understood the laws of opposites, so he must walk with his left foot forward to trample down evil so his heart can go forward. See, as you trample it down, then your heart will go forward. So this was the purpose of the left leg forward, to trample down evil for his heart to go forward. Later, the European military took this from Kemet, left, right, left, right, left, right. This is where that came from. This African here also has the apron. That's the symbol, and he also has the collar. Now look at that very closely, because you know this guy. His name is George Washington. He has his left leg forward. Look at the collar and the apron. Now you have come back, all the way back, and seeing the origin. But we want to show you where this came from. This didn't start in no 1717 tea house in England. This was the 360 degrees what we had, not no 33 degrees, a few degrees above freezing. These were the true grand masters. This is the origin. So why would you go back to Jerusalem with Solomon's temple, supposedly where Hiram Habith was the grand master for Solomon of 900 years BC? Brothers and sisters, this is over 4,000 years ago. There was no Hiram Habith yet. There was no Solomon yet. So why should we be worshiping them? Because we have lost our story. This is where it all began, Masons. This is where it all came from. This is the true worshipful Grand Master that stood in the northeast corner where you are right now to get the light where the light of the world came from. This is where the Pythagorean order came from. So we got all kinds of levels we're going to be dealing with here. But this is where it came from. And that's why they put this symbol on the dollar bill. They knew where the light of the knowledge came from.
Then we'll carry on. First of all, we continuously to run into problems where, as I said before, Europeans are involved with many of the books that are written on Egypt. They're also involved in the education of the tourist guides here. With no disrespect to Mr. Abdallah, but this is not the gateway to Africa. Where you are now is not the gateway to Africa. You are in Africa. This is another psychopathic, racist statement by Europeans to make you think that you are somewhere other than in Africa, by saying that this is a gateway to Africa, as if Africa is somewhere else further down the Nile. Okay? This is a continuous problem that we run into. Even the naming of the cataracts that we saw yesterday that we talked about. You don't name no cataract against the flow of the river. That's why they came in and named the first cataract here. This is the sixth cataract in this region. The first cataract is a little north of Khartoum.
South.
Little north of Khartoum. Okay, which would be south from here, the little north of Khartoum would be the sixth, would be considered the first cataract, and this would be the sixth cataract. This is something that we have to definitely get straight. When we also look at the first dynasty, the pharaoh named Normer, who defeated Scorpion and reunited Egypt, where did Normer come from? Normer came up from the south. He came up from the region that would be considered Nubia. This is another thing that we have to look at. If we look at the old kingdom pharaohs in the pre-dynastic period, all of this came up from the south. This region was called the Tanihasi. Egypt was called the Temerian. They were not cousins. They were brothers. One nation of people. That's no different from the Kikuyu and the Maasai. Not two separate distinct nations. The culture is the same because, yes, Nubia was the mother. As we repeatedly said, the oldest kingdom found in Nubia was Tasseti, going back over 26,000 years. It's in the area of Costul. As I said, Bruce Williams, who did the excavations in this region from the Oil Institute, have dug up many of the artifacts to validate that, in fact, Nubia was the mother and, yes, Egypt was the daughter. But again, we find a continuous breakdown. Even the breakdown is even further when we get it into the theological racist concept in the origins of man. Meaning that the theological origin of man, Ham, Cush, Canaan, and Punt. Those are the theological racist interpretations of the origin of man. For instance, the Africans in this region biblically would not be considered Africans, but considered Hamites. Black Caucasians, as they call them. This is just an allegorical racist myth that was brought on early by the early Sanhedrin priests. You can't take and put a biblical story on the information that you see here. Those are just allegorical myths that you can't find nowhere. You can't go and show me no Cain, and you can't go and show me no Ham, but here you can come and see Osiris written, the long legacy that's on the temples here. You can't connect that with this, because these people came and stole these concepts from here. So when we start talking about and connecting the allegorical stories of the Bible, the Old Testament, the New Testament, and the Quran, you cannot connect that with this. This is other people's interpretation of African people's history. Whether we deal with it anthropologically, with the Caucasoids, Mongoloids, Negroids, this is another anthropological racist interpretation of the origins of man. And we have to continuously look at that. We can't continuously find ourselves locked into a biblical interpretation trying to identify our history. Because if you do try to identify your history on that level, then you would have to justify the fact that you were cursed by God in the Ham story. As the Ham story tells us that these early Jews wrote against African people. Why? Because they were stealing everything from here, as we'll see as we proceed along with our journey.
Now, concepts that we see in this chapel right here is very important because on December the 25th, as the sun has always done, is born out of the death of winter. So our ancestors took this story that goes back to an early period, and Haru became personified as the birth of the sun at December the 25th. He became personified as the sun. So symbolically, it showed that Aset gave her holy birth on December the 25th. How they would know, because it's the heliacal rising of her star perpendicular to the sun at December the 25th, that I go out in my backyard and witness this every winter. You can too. As Ceres rises, the constellation of Orion rises to the east of it. There, when that star rises, it's said that Haru would be born. Precisely at December the 25th is the birth of the sun. Then we see during the time of the spring solstice, that's the resurrection of the sun. Now, the question is, why is it the spring solstice doesn't have the same date as the winter solstice? We know that Christmas is always December the 25th. But nobody can ever tell you when the date of Easter is. Sometimes it's in March, sometimes it's in April. You know why? Because it's a Tahuti holiday. It's a lunar holiday. Now, how you can tell, it's always it's the first full moon after the spring solstice. Those of you who remember those calendars that got the phases of the moon on it, that they are now taken out of circulation because you can start to look at it. So when you look at the spring solstice, some of you can get the calendars that got the spring solstice, follow it, first full moon, the first Sunday is Easter. That's how you can tell when Easter is going to be, because it's a lunar holiday. And considering it's a lunar holiday, who represented the Neteru for the lunar? Tahuti. So that's what it goes back to. ancient Kemet. That's why we see the dates are different all the time. Even though most people wouldn't know that anyway, because they got you into the bunny, the rabbit, the chocolate rabbit and the eggs, even though a rabbit doesn't lay eggs, because that's Greek Orpheus stuff, because their idea of the resurrection was based off of the Greek women painting themselves, and they would run and hide. The Greek men would get a pregnant rabbit because the rabbit's proliferation, because it's born with his eyes wide open. That would symbolize what? The moon, the full moon. A rabbit's born with his eyes wide open. So that had symbolism to it. So when they would find her, they would have all this sex and fornication until the rabbit had its litter. And that was the Greeks' idea of how the spring solstice came back. Okay? So that's why there's no difference between the Playboy bunny and the Easter bunny. They both represent sex. And then, of course, if you don't get enough sex, you start to eat chocolate. Yeah, that's why you got a chocolate rabbit and a big chocolate rabbit. The bigger the chocolate rabbit, the more sex you need. That's what it goes back to. So this is all symbolism. So when you start to paint that egg, it's the Greek females who painted themselves. So tell your children the truth. They're going on the Easter egg hunt because that's what it came out of. Now, yes, an Easter egg hunt. When they do that thing in the White House, they're going on an Easter egg hunt instead of Easter egg hunt. Now, right here, see Heteru up there, her zoop type? Okay, what's her ears look like? A cow. Why? So here we see, so this is a zoomorphic, anthropomorphic animal and human figure here representing the cow, because the cow, the great Mother Earth, as well as the surrogate mother for Heru. And this chapel right here, this is where Heru was born on December the 25th that I showed you in the lecture in that tour book that they took out of circulation because white folks became mad at the fact that this chapel that predated the establishment of Western version of Christianity, where Heru was born on December the 25th. So again, that's what makes these the books in stone, brothers and sisters. Our ancestors built for eternity. When you see the brick walls around this structure here, that was not meant to stay for eternity. That's why it's all dilapidated. But these structures are here for eternity. So 1,000, 2,000 years from now, hopefully, the story that I'm telling from the truth from these temples right here, and stories that we still don't know and should know, and the only way we're going to know is to study this ancestral knowledge. So we're coming back here to evoke the ancestral spirits, and it takes us. It takes us to do this, because white folks are too caught up into their own deification of themselves and their own religion and thinking that's the truth.